Enotria The Last Song is a new Italian-inspired Souls-like that released over this past week, and after beating it, I've got to say I feel fairly disappointed and underwhelmed. While the game does have strengths that will most likely suffice enough to keep you playing until the end of its 15 to 20 hour campaign, it's often a clumsy, buggy mess that never elevates itself to the heights of its peers. Before I get into my vast number of criticisms, I want to talk about what Enotria does right. It's got a great setting, which is a stark contrast to the typical grimdark fantasy settings for Souls-likes, and it apparently features a lot of Italian lore and mythology, though I'm completely unfamiliar with it. It has excellent level design, interconnected pathways that lead back to shortcuts with fairly decent performance. It's got a really cool, saturated color scheme, which is fun to look at, and it's very distinct and unique. The exploration is excellent, and each of the three main areas have distinct aesthetics and fairly decent enemy variety, with lots of loot to find off the beaten path. Fighting common enemies, not bosses, is fun, with lots of emphasis on elemental status effects, along with the presentation of a defense poise unraveling meter. Unfortunately, Enotria has far more problems than positives. Starting with the elemental system, which the entire game revolves around, it's poorly communicated how the system actually works, insofar as, for each of the 4 specific offensive status effects that an enemy may have, there is one absolute effect you should use against them more than the others to maximize your damage output. This is communicated through a particular graphic at the top left of the screen, but you need to read this graphic counterclockwise in order to determine which effect should best be used in any particular encounter. Starting from the top, if an enemy has a pink health bar, you should use red abilities against them. And if they have red, use white. If they have white, use green. And if they have green, use pink. While there are specific items that you can consume to give your weapons specific elemental effects, the way the game intends you to apply them is through 4 perks you'll unlock at the very start of the game. These 4 perks are applied to your 4 lines, or magical abilities you can use after generating enough damage from enemy encounters. The problem is that these perks apply the 4 elemental effects in a specific order that is not the same order presented by the graphic permanently affixed to the screen. While these lines are presented in a 4-point diamond similar to the graphic, you think that the top slot would be pink, the bottom would be white, etc., but it's not. Instead, these elemental effects are applied in a vertically flipped and reversed order, starting from noon in a clockwise direction of white, pink, red, and green. I find this to be an unintuitive and clunky approach that makes no sense from a user experience standpoint. Not only do you have to reference a graphic and read it counterclockwise to determine what effect you should use for almost every enemy encounter, but you then have to memorize the unintuitive order of how that specific effect wants to be mapped to a specific line ability. Why the hell is the order not in the same presentation of the graphic? I don't understand the reasoning for this, as it makes the entire elemental system incredibly frustrating to execute. For something that is a core gameplay mechanic, this is just bad game design. Elemental systems aside, the game has a host of features intended to disempower the player at every turn, resulting in artificial difficulty throughout. As previously stated, your line abilities charge uses through combat encounters. Dealing more damage over time unlocks them for use, unless you're going to fight a boss, in which case they will reset entirely. This means for the first few minutes of every fight, your magical abilities will not be at your disposal until you deal enough damage to the boss. Even if you spent the last 10 minutes clearing out enemies in order to have them charged up specifically for a boss fight. Why? Why give the player a tool that they can't use? It doesn't make any sense to disempower them right as they're about to need them. It's bizarre. There's also a stark contrast to fighting general enemies versus fighting bosses, meaning that when fighting standard mobs, your attacks will stagger them, often breaking their attacks, giving you more time to deal damage. But this is not the case for bosses. You cannot stagger them unless you completely fill their unraveling meter. For a Souls-like, Enotria has thrown out certain staples of the genre, like being able to backstab enemies, or more importantly, to get iframes from dodging. There are no iframes in this game, and dodging is generally useless, so if you don't parry everything perfectly, you'll get stomped into the ground. Boss fights are one of the worst parts of the game. mainly because they have infinite stamina and can't be staggered until they become unraveled. For a game built around a parry system, this means you're not creating that deflect, attack, rhythm dynamic like in Sekiro, where bosses can respond to your aggression and change their attack patterns to compensate. No, not in Enotria. Here, you have to parry long attack combos and wait until the end of such combos to get in some minor damage. You may be able to get some damage in between attacks only if you're using small weapons, like long swords, as otherwise the attack windup for the vast majority of all other weapons is far too long for these small windows of opportunity, resulting in you becoming staggered until the boss completes their attack combo. This also includes your magical abilities, which do not offer hyper armor by default, meaning you'll almost never manage to get these attacks off if you're at close range. It just sucks and tilts the game towards always using smaller weapons over the larger ones, as their attack timing is much shorter by comparison. There's also small quality of life choices that seem so out of place, like the item which can be used to return to your closest bonfire, but will drop your XP when you do so. It's basically just a way for you to unalive yourself, as it's the same function for when you die. Why would I want to use this? I then have to trek back to the same location to reclaim my XP, taking out every enemy along the way, when I should have just walked back to the checkpoint in the first place. There are just so many bugs with this game. I think the reason why they gave you that homeward bone item in general is because it's very possible that the game will crash during a boss fight, resulting in you spawning back into the boss room, but without the boss. You'll basically be stuck in that room and need to warp back to the bonfire in order to reset everything. Even simple things like elevators may not work, or talking to certain NPCs will take away your controls outright, forcing you to close the game and relaunch it again in order to continue. It's just a mess. Beyond the bugs and litany of other issues I simply do not have time to cover, the most egregious thing the devs have done was release the product roadmap 3 days after the initial release, stating that the game will be in its final completed state 6 months from now. While it's one thing to fix bugs and performance issues that crop up after release, it's another thing entirely to state that the final version of the game is still 6 months away. Instead of being honest with the player base and releasing this game as early access, which the current state of the game absolutely is, they were fairly deceptive here and pulled a bait and switch. For $50, which is effectively the price of a AAA game, this AA game is charging for an equivalent amount, and this just seems like an incredibly scummy thing to do. Enotria The Last Song offers a AA experience for a AAA price, and while it provides an amazing visual aesthetic and glimpse into Italian folklore, its attempt to add a new elemental twist to the Souls-like formula ultimately falls flat. Bogged down by artificial difficulty, annoying boss fights, and an unintuitive user experience, along with a $50 price tag that is tantamount to early access, I'm going to give Enotria a 6 out of 10. If this game sorts out all of its issues in the next few months and drops below $40 in the future, then I suggest only picking it up on sale, if at all. Otherwise, in its current state, don't waste your time and don't waste your money. Anyway, what did you think of Enotria The Last Song? Do you agree with my criticisms, or do you think I'm way off the mark? Let me know down in the comments. Now, that's all I gotta say for this one. So get the hell out of here.